Hey, what's up everyone? Mike here in the BFH garage. Have a problem with my ARB compressor. As you can hear, it's cycling on and off about every 5 seconds. So that tells me there's a leak somewhere. And you guys know how I am. When it comes to ARB leaks, you know, you got to get inside the axle, find those leaks. But my problem, oh, let me shut this stupid thing off. Gosh, that was annoying. So anyway, I want to walk you through how to troubleshoot finding an air leak on a compressor. It could be an ARB compressor, it could be anything else that you're running for air lockers. In this case here, it's going to be easiest. It's always easiest to start with your compressor, work your way back. So the way this is going to work, the very first thing I did is I turn on my compressor. Well, it runs, it holds air for about 3 minutes before it cycles again. So I could still potentially have a parasitic leak there somewhere that air's just barely sneaking out. I'd like to see it hold it longer than that, but I would be okay with that if that's all it was. In this case here, as you heard, it's leaking about every 5 seconds. So something's leaking, it's cycling, it leaks, it cycles, it's a vicious cycle. So first thing I'm gonna do is start by turning on my compressor and nothing else. Let it sit, time it to see how long it is going to take to cycle. If that doesn't resolve the problem or show the problem at that point, then I'm going to move on to the next thing, which is engaging, in this case, my rear locker. ARB wiring only lets you engage the rear first, then the front, unless you do a bypass, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, back to the rear lock, I'm going to go to that one next. If the time cycle stays at 3 minutes or whatever it was that I first timed it at, then I know that's probably not my issue. Then I'll turn on the front locker. And then if all of a sudden it starts cycling every 5 seconds, I can be certain that it has something to do with from the compressor where that solenoid attaches between there and between the locker inside the housing. So at least I have it identified as the location of where I'm trying to track this down, narrowed it down to that. So in this case here, I turn on the compressor, goes 3 minutes. I turn on the rear locker starts cycling every 5 seconds. So I have it narrowed down now to somewhere from where the solenoid goes into the compressor to the rear locker. Somewhere in there is my issue. So let me show you the next step I'm going to do to help figure out what it is. So in this case here, you want to turn off anything that has background noise. If you have radios, heaters, anything like that, you want to turn those off. You want to turn your compressor on. And I know already, I've ruled out that the compressor's not the issue. Then I turn on my rear locker. It's already got air to it, but as you can see now, it's already starting to cycle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back up to my compressor here, and I'm going to listen and see if I can hear anything. And sure as heck I can. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my hand in there and see if I can feel anything, any leaks coming out anywhere. I do have a leak. I can feel it, but there's one other definitive way to find out where that's coming from. I'm going to show you how to do that now. Okay, get yourself a squirt bottle, in this case like this. Fill it a little bit with some dish soap of your choice, mix it in with some water, and the whole idea is to get soapy water. I know a lot of you have already heard this trick, but for you young ones out there that haven't ever experienced this, what you're going to do is you're going to turn your compressor back on. I'm going to turn that locker back on, let it start leaking, and I'm going to simply spray water around all the fittings. So I have a connection that fits here. I have a connection that fits right here. That goes into the housing. So there's a whole bunch of fittings that need to be sprayed down, which will help me identify exactly where the leak's coming from. So let's do that. It's pretty simple. See right here? Let me zoom in at for you. You see the bubbles that are shooting out of that fitting? That is what you're looking for. So all of those bubbles coming out of there, that's telling you where your air leak's at. So luckily for me, because I have this thing tucked all the way down inside this tray. Luckily for me, the only thing I need to do is pull that fitting off, reapply some pipe dope to it, reconnect it, and I can do that right there without having to take everything else apart. All right, so I'm gonna grab a wrench and I come up here and I just checked this by hand. This fitting was never tightened down all the way, so I'm a ding dong. I didn't tighten it down, so I'm gonna pull the blue line off of there. That thing never got tightened down to begin with, so if I take this and snug this thing down, that may solve my problem. Or it could be that I over-tightened it and that solenoid is cracked. So I'm going to figure out here in just a second. So as many turns as that took to tighten up, that's telling me that I just did not tighten that fitting when I installed the compressor into this Jeep. So you remember the shakedown I did on Holy Cross Trail, my compressor was cycling on and off a bunch, driving me nuts, and now I know why. So this should be an easy fix. I thought I was gonna have to take this entire thing out, so this video is gonna be for naught, but I'll still post it. But anyway, that's what you wanna do, is you wanna get in there with that soapy water. You wanna start spraying on those connections. When you see bubbles, you know that's where your leak is. And if you tighten that leak and the bubbles stop and you still have your compressor cycling over and over, then you want to continue spraying fittings until you make sure everything is tight. One of the things I normally do, and I didn't in this case because I was down to the wire to get this thing up on a trailer to get ready to go to that trail, is that I didn't bench test this before I reinstalled it back into this Jeep, because I had to move everything around. I had everything nice and tight, or so I thought. And I didn't connect the wiring up just to make sure it ran before I bolted it down into there. So that's one thing you could do to not have to do what I just did, is to test it prior to installing it. But in this case here, hopefully that's a simple fix. I'm gonna go run that compressor again and see if that resolves that. Okay, with the compressor on, it's been more than 5 seconds, so that's great. It's not leaking, so that is my issue. But to make sure I have that leak completely stopped, I'm going to spray some more soapy water on there because I want to make sure that I still don't have a minor leak on that. Now, as you're looking in there, you can see that there's no bubbles coming off of that right now. So real quick while I'm here, I'm just going to get those other fittings. I just want to make sure I'm not missing something else. And it appears that everything is good. That's great. So now what I'm going to do is turn on my front locker and make sure I don't have the same problem there. All right, with the compressor on, both lockers activated, I shouldn't hear, actually, let's take a look right here. You're gonna see what I'm talking about. So if you look right there, I have a couple bubbles leaking out of there. So I'm gonna go ahead and tighten that one up. And again, this is just because I didn't get it tightened prior to installing it because I was in such a hurry. And the thing that sucks about that is when you're in a hurry, you're going to make yourself add a whole bunch of time to a project because you have to go back and fix it versus just doing it right the first time. So, lesson learned for me. Hopefully you learn from this one as well. All right, with that being identified right there, I'm going to pop this one out real quick. And to release these ARB lines out of the solenoids, you just got to push down on that orange ring. So go to both sides, push down, and pull up on that air line at the same time. Oh yeah, this one's pretty loose too. I'm lucky it wasn't worse than what it was. So I'm gonna tighten that one up, put that back in. I'm gonna run the compressor again. And I'm gonna spray it all down again. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything. So what I'll do is I'll let this I'll let the compressor stay on with the lockers engaged, and I'll time how long it takes for that to cycle. And if I get to a certain point, I'm going to be pretty happy with that, and we'll go from there. So let's talk about the rest of this real quick. Well, that ended up being a pretty easy fix for me, which is so incredibly rare. I think I've had one easy fix in the last 10 years, so I'll mark that one up as a win. However, let's talk about this compressor a little bit more. And again, it doesn't have to be an ARB compressor. It can be any compressor you're using to air your lockers or drive your lockers. So again, you start at that compressor first, just cycle that without opening any other solenoids or anything, so that way you keep the compressor filled with air under pressure and wait to see how long it cycles. If it takes longer than 8 or 10 minutes, you're good to go. If it cycles every 5 minutes, I would be looking for a leak. In this case here, my compressor's cycling in about 3.5 minutes. I still need to find a leak in there, but it's so very minimal right now that I'm gonna let it ride for a while because I just don't have the time to work on it. But let's talk about, all of a sudden you completely clear the compressor. You've done the second part of the checks where you're spraying soapy water all over the fittings where the solenoids meet up. Those are good, and you still have cycling of air. So at that point then, now we know it's going to be from where the blue line connects into the solenoid, between there and your lockers. So in that case there, I'll start doing it piece by piece. I'll pull out, let's just say I'll start with the rear one. I'll pull out my air line from the bulkhead fitting. I'll cap that, I'll run the cycle. And what that does is that eliminates the air line as an issue. Then I'll rehook up the line to the bulkhead fitting, run it. I'll spray some water around that, or some soapy water around that fitting, but usually that's not the source of the leak. So I'll do that to the rear first, then I'll do it to the front. And if I'm still cycling with one or the other, so it should be fairly easy to identify whether your front axle or your rear axle is giving you the grief. Anyway, hone in on that axle. And if you need to pull the diff cover off, then so be it. So with ARB specifically, you have two rubber O-rings in there that surround the air channel, and that's what keeps it airtight in there. After, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, those things will need to be replaced once they start leaking. Sometimes it's less than that. It depends on who installed your gears, how rough they were with those O-rings. In my case, I baby those things like you wouldn't believe. They go on nice and easy. I make sure I don't twist them, I don't nick them. And when I put the seal housing on, I'm making sure that I'm twisting it as I'm pushing. That way I'm not creating any nicks or anything in those O-rings in there. So you have to keep that stuff in mind. So if you don't want to change out your O-rings, be gentle putting them in. Once they're in, they're absolutely fine. People talk all the time about how these things are so fragile. That's not the case. You just need to set them up right, and then they're gonna work great for you. So with that being done, that wraps up this project. Fairly simple. Soapy water's your friend when you're chasing air leaks. Be liberal with it. Spray it over everything. When you find that leak, fix it. Continue to time and cycle to make sure you don't have any other leaks. You'll be good to go. See you.